Hello and welcome to the Better Bexley Podcast. This is a podcast for young people by young people. For this episode, we have teamed up with the Bexley Voluntary Service Council, BVSC, to discuss with some young people what their opinions are about the pandemic and the vaccines. How do you feel about the vaccine?
Yes. For me, I'm not I'm not a doctor, I don't understand anything to do with medicine, so if a doctor suggests that vaccine is going to help me, I'm going to get it, because who am I to argue with their knowledge and what they know? And also, I wouldn't question getting the polio vaccine, I wouldn't question getting like the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine or any other vaccine that I was told to get, so I don't see why I would question this one. I just don't personally see the difference. If that's going to stop me and if that's going to help me get my life back to normal and help me travel home to see my family, then sign me up.
So just blind taking, kind of? Not like looking into it, or like...
Well, I mean, it's not really just blind taking, is it? If all of the doctors are recommending it, if, you know... And I know that you were saying earlier about the government, but it wasn't just the government, it wasn't just Boris being like, go get the vaccine, it was Boris backed with like medical scientists and backed with doctors, and if the NHS are the first people to get it, I'm not going to call into question.
So you don't question the authority at all?
Not so much the authority, but doctors and scientists.
That is the authority.
Well, but there are some doctors that are actually against taking the vaccine, and they publicly do show that, and some of them have lost their job because they chose not to take the vaccine. What do you say to that?
I just say, well, if the majority of the doctors are still recommending it, then I'm still going to do it.
I think just because a minority says it, and a minority goes to, okay, we're going to gang up on this. You know, like, I think just because a minority says it and because an authority figure says this kind of thing, I think we've all learned that some things that authority says, like how important are SATs, how important are GCSEs. I think everyone says that that's like the most important thing, and then you have to kind of take a step back and you go, well, how important really is this? You know, I think like everything has to be questioned, like your parents, the government, every organisation has to be questioned, because you can't just trust for no reason.
What kind of questions do you think people should be asking?
Is it right for me? Where does the funding come from? What's the responsibilities of these? How much money are they making from it? Like, at the end of the day, whether you've been jabbed or not here, I don't want to know, but if you have, someone has made some sort of profit off of that. Someone's taken home some money from that. Like, there's no profit and there's no money to come from natural immunity, which has been widely, openly discussed. There's no profit from healthy foods, exercising. You can't profit off of running, of everyone just getting healthy. That's not where the money makes. You know, there's always a classic phrase of follow where the money goes.
My name's Faith Uwadiae, so I'm a postdoctoral scientist, so I basically am a scientist with a PhD, and I'm an immunologist, and I'm based at the Francis Crick Institute. So I study the immune system, mostly in malaria, but I did my PhD in respiratory science, so I have some basis there as well. But yeah, I'm happy to hear what you guys have to ask me.
I actually set up Sick Up community group 10 years ago, and then Sick Up Partners Limited 5 years ago, and I do that role as voluntary. And then obviously when unfortunately the pandemic came along, I went there to Aspire Pharmacy to do some voluntary work there. So I've been doing that for 15 months now.
From what the studies show, or what I've seen on the government website, being fully vaccinated doesn't stop you from catching it.
No.
It doesn't stop you from spreading it. So it's kind of like you're still kind of unvaccinated in the sense that it doesn't stop you from even being hospitalised. It doesn't stop you from even putting a vulnerable person at risk.
I think I think it does reduce the fact is that being hospitalised, doesn't it? Because 90% of people that are in hospital now are unvaccinated, and they're in ITU. I think are in their 90s that haven't been vaccinated. So there's got to have been something there, hasn't there? You know, so I think me being fully vaccinated is going to reduce that need for me to be hospitalised.
But after all doing that, you've still got the fear in your mind that you could pass it on to a loved one or someone that's vulnerable. So don't you feel like we're kind of going down a deep rabbit hole, in the sense that we just need to eventually just kind of like shift the balance into like return to normal?
Yeah, I think we need to come out of that now. Definitely 100% needs to come out of that.
So I was just listening to that discussion where you were talking about the idea that, you know, if you've been vaccinated, you're still infectious. And while that is true, there are studies where people have shown that if you are vaccinated, you're more likely to recover quicker, so you're less likely to be infectious for longer. So you are still protecting those around you, and there are still benefits to being vaccinated. And there's even been studies where people have shown that if you live in a household with people who are vaccinated, you know, the people around you are less likely to catch it as well. So there is some evidence. It's not just the idea that, you know, if you've had the vaccine, you can still spread it. There's still some benefits in terms of transmission as well.
How much is it working? Like, the effects of it, are they reducing transmission rates and death rates, and by how much is it affecting those statistics?
Well, I think the one thing that we can all say in terms of vaccination is, if we look at what our lives were like prior to vaccines being in place and then now vaccines being in place. So, you know, this time last year or 2021, you know, we were having so many deaths around December and we were really worried. And, you know, we were having deaths of about 1,000 a day pre-vaccines. And then now we've had vaccines in place. We're not seeing that same number of deaths, even though we're having such high numbers of cases. So we've had some of the highest number of cases in December. Living in London, we've all seen how many people, probably you felt as if everyone that you knew had COVID at that time. But when you see how that translates into deaths and hospitalizations, we didn't see that. And that's simply because of the power of vaccines. The one thing that you might say, even if you're unsure about how it affects transmission and people getting it, the one thing that we can say is it really does help protect people from severe disease. So we're not seeing people get horribly ill. We're not seeing that hospitalizations that we were seeing prior to the vaccines, and we're not seeing that translate into death. And that's because we're basically training our immune system how to actually fight off this infection without actually having to go through the actual disease itself. So I say when it comes to deaths, it's quite clear that the vaccines have an impact. When we talk about transmission, I agree, it is a bit more complicated with transmission because, like I said, everyone knows someone who's had 2 doses and been boosted and has still got COVID. And you just think, what is the point? But like I said before, it's that idea that if you are vaccinated, that reduces the risk of actually passing it on, simply because of the fact that if you do get it, you're ill for less time. So therefore, you're infectious for less time. So you're less likely to transmit it to another person. So I think it's quite clear the power that vaccines have had. And if you take before we had Omicron and we had just the Delta variant, we were really starting to see our lives going back to normal. You know, we were going to cinema again. We were seeing our friends and socializing. It was only with the new variant, which, you know, the vaccines weren't designed for, that we were starting to see that change again. So I think the lives that we live are fundamentally changed because of the power of vaccines. And I think one thing is that we were very lucky that vaccines were produced very quickly, because if we didn't have a vaccine now, who knows what it would be like? Would we still be in some sort of lockdown? Would we be thinking, how are we going to live with it? That is a really long answer to say yes, essentially. I think it's massively changed the outlook that we have right now.
You said you have some friends who are unvaccinated, and what you do is you just inform them as best as you can. I was just wondering, what kind of information do you provide to them to just give them a general sense about the vaccine for them to make an informed decision?
Yeah, so generally what I do with they've been unvaccinated for a while, so it is what it is. But what I was doing initially was sitting down with them, and there's some sources. So the British Society of Immunology, it's an organisation of immunologists, and they put together public public engagement information, so really simplified science. So I'd direct them to those kind of sources. I'd sit down with them and have a conversation around vaccines and how they work.
What would you say to these NHS staff who were on the front line during the first wave and through the second wave who refused to basically get the vaccine? Because you're a scientist and obviously you believe in the science, but at the end of the day, it seems to be a large number of people who are in the NHS that refuse to take the vaccine. What would you then say about that? Because they are on the front line, they are seeing the people that are truly ending up in the intensive care units, and it seems like a large proportion of them refuse to take it. What would you then say to those people, especially in the NHS, who refuse to take it?
That's a good question. I think that's a group that's particularly hard to convince, because I think if you have been at the front line and you've seen what happens to people. So my sister's an NHS nurse and she works on some of the COVID wards, and she used to tell me the stories of seeing people who were really young come in and then couldn't breathe and then died. And she was just surprised because in her whole nursing career, she hadn't seen anyone go through that. But, you know, she's vaccinated, but she still was unsure whether or not she wanted to get vaccinated. I think the only thing that I can do as a scientist with this group of people is simply just to kind of emphasize the pros of vaccination and just kind of emphasize the reality. But I do think there's a certain point where if you are on the front line and you've seen it, and, you know, you're seeing it on a day-to-day basis and you still haven't decided to get vaccinated, I think to a certain extent, you might have already made your choice. I think it is hard. All I can do is provide facts and talk to someone and say, you know, this is the reason I think you should be vaccinated. Here are some good sources of information that you might want to read up on. You know, if you're on social media, there's some people called like Team Halo who are giving you sources but quick videos so you can understand. All I can do is put them towards sources of information that will tell them facts. But fundamentally, people have to come to their own decisions. Obviously, if you're taking if you're starting an NHS job, you'll be encouraged to get vaccinated. For example, when I started in the lab and I was working with human samples, I was told to get the Hep B vaccination. I wasn't forced to do it, but I was told for my own protection that it would protect me, so I did it. So I think that's the kind of same ethos we have to go with, and we just have to make people come along with us. But yeah, it's really hard, basically. The best way of summarizing it is there is no right way of doing it. You just have to try, and then people have to come to their own decisions.
This is happening. In June, Israel began giving the Pfizer jab to 12 to 15-year-olds. America, Canada and Germany are doing the same. France will start soon. In the UK, the regulator's given approval, but the government has yet to give the okay. And Pfizer's trial of over 2,000 adolescents who received its vaccine showed 100% efficacy and was well tolerated, or in other words, side effects were mild at worst. And there are several reasons these countries are choosing to do this. The first is to reduce transmission of COVID in schools.
I think not in primary schools. They're too young to know what's going on to make an informed decision about it. I think so, definitely not under the age of 12.
What you think in over that?
If you're more informed about it and you can give informed consent, but children can't, so.
I think it's very crazy as well, because it's just a thing of schools not even allowed to offer kids like paracetamol or like over-the-counter drugs, and then you want them to make a decision about whether being vaccinated or not. I feel like that is a lot of responsibility for a child. Like, what, the highest age in secondary school is 16? Okay. How many 16-year-olds would do due diligence and actually check on the government website or what the risks are? Is it beneficial to them? Do they actually need it? They would probably either have their parents persuade them or just take it just because everyone else takes it. I think it's very dangerous as well, because you don't know what your kid's headspace is, and for them to make such a big decision is quite risky.
I think, like, in terms of secondary schools, I mean, yes, I said it was blind trust, but Faith also said that it's clearly working and it's clearly doing the thing. So I think in secondary schools, I think if the country, I don't think it will, but if the country was to go into another lockdown, I think the biggest like I'm a youth worker, and I think the biggest priority I would have, like in terms of teenagers, is their mental health, like being away from school and that sort of thing. It's like such a priority that they get to school, and if the vaccine is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which apparently it is, then actually I do think it's a choice thing, but if they choose to get it, I don't see why we don't let teenagers. I mean, you can drive when you're 17. You're still 17 in secondary school.
At younger ages, so is the argument that...
I know 14-year-olds that have got it, but it's been their choice.
Yeah, but is the argument that younger ages shouldn't have it, or they shouldn't be offered it, because they can't make the decision for themselves? Because you can't, like a 5-year-old doesn't understand anything about it. Is that the argument of saying we shouldn't offer it in schools, or that we shouldn't give it to them? Or is it because they're really unlikely to die from it?
I don't know about primary schools, but I think in secondary schools, like we have walk-in clinics here, and I think it could be, if it's offered, I don't know what it's offered like in secondary schools, I'm not going to lie, but if it was offered as in, you can opt in, you can choose in a secondary school, then I think that's fine, with the parents' permission and with the child's permission, and I think it has to be both, because just because a young person says, yeah, I want to get the vaccine, if the parent doesn't agree, then I think that's got to be a conversation that they have, but I equally don't believe that a parent should make the decision for the young person without the young person's consent. But I think if it was, like both of them, I think if it was offered at school, then do it. The more opportunities, the better.
Do you think maybe if people didn't want to be vaccinated, they could learn from home like that? And
I think that it's a very biased thing when you learn from home. Like I know people who, like, they don't have money to have Wi-Fi. They're missing out on education being at home because they can't get onto the Wi-Fi, and that's a very real thing just in London, let alone in the country.
I think it's very dangerous as well, because I feel like most of us grew up in an era where kids actually played outside. Like most of these kids don't want to play outside. Most of these kids don't want to. And then imagine having that on a global scale where everyone just prefers to stay home, and we all know how beneficial it is to get things such as exercise, sunlight, jogging and stuff like that. If these kids aren't getting that, then it's just like, how will that affect you in school? How would that affect your brain development? How would that also affect your immune system as well? Because going outside, you're picking up bacteria, unnecessary bacteria. You're always at home. Look at what you're taking away from yourself. To the point where if you do get, let's say, the common cold, you may struggle. You may struggle for a person your age, which is like, could be quite young, that could be concerning. I feel like as well, because of these constant lockdowns and because of these uncertainties with vaccines and COVID and stuff like that, the new pandemic will be mental health, because a lot of people have been tucked away, a lot of people have been cut off. You've seen on the news, you've probably heard from people, the amount of people that had to watch loved ones be buried or say goodbye from a screen, and it takes away the intimacy of actually being there and holding their hand while they're at death's door. So it's just like, you've got to be careful of how far we indulge in this whole technology and how this pandemic is letting us shape the younger generation, because I feel like most of it is fear-built. A lot of it is just going to affect them in ways that we can't even comprehend or see right now, but as they grow older, it's going to affect them. A lot of people will turn around and ask why.
taking all of that into consideration, do you guys think the vaccine should be mandated or not?
But in what sense mandated? Because there's a varying degree of mandation. There's a varying degree of like how enforced it's going to be. There's one of, you can't leave your house and we're going to come knocking on every single door in the country to see if you've had it or not. We're going to track you and see all of this. And there's the other sense of planes, what's happening at the moment, of schools and education and shops nowadays. How far do you go with checking and making sure? Where do you think the cut-off point is?
I haven't really thought about that actually, but if I was trying to book a flight home back to the States and I couldn't because of my vaccination status, I think I'd probably would try to fight it, try to find a way for me to get home. without. Because I do believe it is a choice. If it was my country telling me I couldn't come back unless I was vaccinated, that would be my country's decision. And I would probably still try to find another way, but it was also, that is a decision someone's made. And I'd want to try to have a conversation about it and how to try to have a conversation about it and how can I see their point of view and not just immediately go, well, I don't agree with it, and start actually having the conversation. But I do believe that it should be a personal choice and it shouldn't be forced on someone.
I don't think that should be how it is, because if it's your own choice to get vaccinated, then it shouldn't be compulsory to go on a plane, because you've had the choice not to take it. So why should they restrict your travel just because you've chose what you've chosen, you know?
I don't believe it should be mandated. I feel like it's still a personal choice. I still believe that, as Oliver said, if you have no underlying health conditions, if you're exercising, eating well, if you're taking care of yourself properly, then at the end of the day, you should be fine. I feel like it's gotten to the point where it's a conspiracy to believe that your natural immune system can't help you or won't help you to the point where you need it to. I also believe that by making it mandatory, you're also taking away people's rights, and you're also taking people's rights to choose and think for themselves, to the point where it's just a one-way thinking. But as humans, we're different. We will think the same. We will react to things differently. So it's just I don't think it should be mandated because of those type of things.
So I think as well with the whole COVID pass, I think it's very dangerous in the sense that what you're starting to see is kind of like a ranking system or a class system, and the people that have been vaccinated are now starting to look like they're better than the people that aren't vaccinated. I think that's very dangerous, because at the end of the day, vaccines have been around for years, and at the end of the day, people have made their decisions to or not to take them. But it's getting to a point now where if you don't take this certain one, you're now a threat, you're now shouldn't be allowed out. I mean, I've seen it in other countries such as Spain and Germany, where they've literally divided shops, where they've literally had their human rights taken away. They can't, go to public places unless they're vaccinated. But then at the end of the day, people in power will be like, we're not forcing you. Well, you're kind of looking like you are, because at the end of the day, if you're not taking it, then socializing, having fun, seeing people, doing the things you like will then be taken away from it. So it's also forcing you into submission. But at the end of the day, it's labelled as we're not forcing you. But subliminally, if you look at what they're taking away from you, if you're looking at what they're doing, they are. And I feel like at the end of the day, you shouldn't have your medical records checked that thoroughly. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's yours for a reason. I don't feel like anyone here would be comfortable to state their medical records from the day they were born up to the present day. So why should I carry a pass to let you feel safe for me to be let in? At the end of the day, as Sue said, you're not even sure if that person, if that is that person's, because people can swap it, people can find ways around it. So at the end of the day, I feel like these COVID passes are dangerous, and if they are not controlled, then what you're going to have is an unfair society.
So with this discussion today, we've talked about mandatory vaccination. I'm not pro mandatory vaccination. I don't necessarily believe that you should force someone to put something in their body that they don't agree with, or something that they don't want. I think my role as a scientist is just to give you that information so you can go away and make your own decision. If you come to the side of what I'm on, which ideally, come and get vaccinated, but if you don't, we can't exclude you from society either. We've got to find a way to come round from this. So yeah, I don't think the fundamental thing is that you want to hurt someone. It's just you've made a decision for yourself. It may not necessarily be a decision that I agree with, and I have made a different decision for myself, but that doesn't make you fundamentally a bad person. So, yeah, I think the NHS in particular is a really hard area for the mandatory vaccination argument, because, you know, if you do catch the virus and you spread it to your patients, it's such a risk.
We have a unanimous decision that the vaccine should not be mandated. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well done, guys.
Thank you.
Woo!